Hey, everybody. Thanks for dropping by. Kristen, how you doing this week?
I am obsessed.
You're obsessed. Oh, right. That's what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
I was just like, you're upset already.
I'm also upset.
Yeah. What are you upset about?
I am upset about thinking about obsession, really. As I think like I have actually, it's like method acting because I was like, oh, we're being obsessed, like, for this session. I did things that were obsessive, but that kind of upset me. So I think I've accidentally turned into Robert De Niro or something.
What? I do not understand that reference. What do you mean?
Like a method actor. Is he a method
Oh,
actor? Am I
no, are you
mixing
talking
with
about Daniel Day-Lewis?
Oh yeah, or like Christian Bale.
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah. How about
that's
you?
interesting. So, okay. So you did the do obsessed things so that you can like feel more in kind of like the energy of the show.
Mhm.
I'm kind of upset right now, and as a result of, like, the ambient, like, upsetness, I did the obsessive behaviors, except just, like, I guess, naturally.
Mhm.
A and so it's unfortunately a perfect, time to be talking about this because apparently we're both coming off of, the opposite of a high, I guess, is a low. So we're both coming into this at the trough, the bottom here.
Exactly. I think that's the energy of the evening show. We're
Yeah.
both a little bit tired.
Speaking of energy, we got a lot of people in the chat right now. I appreciate y'all. We got
Yeah.
Achilles, Associate, Dan, thank you for dropping in. Melanin, Jins Bay, who's a cat, pss, 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 pss. And Colin, thank you for dropping by. Sam as well. Thanks for coming in and appreciate the compliments on our shirts. They are
Yeah.
pretty good. Kristen, so for our audio viewers, how would you describe your outfit of the day?
I would say it like a butchy flannel situation.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's
Um,
accurate.
yeah, very much like a Patagonia, kind of
Yeah.
outfit. How would you describe yours?
It's like my Hank Green shirt.
Oh.
Spaceships and planets and stuff. I actually got this at the Space Needle in Seattle, I think it's called, right?
Oh.
The big building thing in
Mhm,
Seattle. I
mhm,
got it there when I was interning at Amazon, and I was just like, man, I gotta have this shirt.
mhm. Speaking of Harry, are you a Nerf fighter?
What?
Do you know the Hank and John Green community, Nerf
Oh,
criteria?
yes. So I'm not like an active member of the community. I have done my rabbit holing.
Oh, I didn't realize that you can publicly access it.
So there's a subreddit which like posts some of the stuff from it.
Interesting, interesting. Well, yeah, thanks so much everyone for joining us. Oh my gosh. Hi Shoni. It's very nice to see you.
Yeah.
Mixie. Dungeon
It,
Master Emmy, which I think is Dirty Hippie on Farcaster.
ooh, love me some dirty hippie in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm pretty excited about today's mostly because it's like an experiment with like a new format that we hadn't really intended when we started the show. But I'm pretty stoked that we're gonna like explore some darkness with the light that we like to that we like to spend some time in. What do you have any strong feelings about the show?
I think we kind of experimented with this like twin theme format, right? Because
Mm,
we wanted like Tuesday is the uppity show, but then it's sort of like, is that realistic? Because I feel like for me, like actually, it's one of my obsessions. It's creators who kind of present this like vibe of chillness, but then they kind of hide all the hustle that they do and like the fact that it's not as easy as they make it out to be. So I
yeah.
kind of really want a Thursday show to be like realistic Kristen and Cameron who are
Uh, uh,
struggling in their daily lives. And
Honesty comes to mind.
exactly.
Like we obviously have a ton of conversations where we kind of talk about the lowlights
Mhm.
of what we do, and that's like, not as fun for people to listen in on. And I think we can do a good job of making this like honest, useful, and entertaining. But like y'all in the chat, let us know. Oh, it also looks like we got our first, as far as I can remember, comment on the Twitch stream, which is really cool. So Aaron Mo, if you're
Think it's a
listening,
bot, Cameron.
dang it. I just glanced at it, but it looks
Oh
like
my
I
god,
got
so
baited by the
hilarious.
bot. But if you
Yeah, yeah.
are
You said
real,
that
we're
there's
over on YouTube.
bots that are similar to Farcaster bots where you will
Mm,
read the first few sentences and be like, "Oh," and then you're like, "Wait a minute."
they got me.
Oh, so funny. All right. Well, yeah, as usual, we have some bangers picked out by Cameron today.
All right, let's get
We'll
into
be
it.
showing you that in a second.
We got some good ones
Yeah.
today. I'm I'm like it was oddly challenging. Maybe not oddly, but like it was an interesting challenge to find the right bangers to go along with the topic of obsession.
Mhm.
Um, because I wanted them to be healthy, or at the very least, like examples of how to kind of maintain some sort of semblance of like making your life better, while
Oh,
also being like pretty honest about a rough topic. But so this one is from Triumph, who's pretty freaking funny. If you're not following them on excuse me, Farcaster or on Warpcast, like definitely do that. But for our audio listeners, it's a Charmander protecting its tail from a wave of water. And the caption is me trying to protect my light from the self-centered energy vampires. Any reactions, Kristen?
I love this one. And for those of you who are really young, maybe, and don't know Pokemon lore, the Charmander dies if the flame goes out of the tail.
Yeah, which is terrifying, by the way. Like as a kid, I was just like, man, this is way higher stakes than I expected for one of my favorite Pokemon.
Hmm. But
Um,
yeah, this is quite a vibe.
yeah, and so like in terms of if we're gonna intellectualize this, like why is this a banger? Pokemon always hits with a certain like sector of the internet. Cute things in general always hit. Charmander with the life and death stakes here hits, but the caption is not one that I like really expected when I was reading it, which is why like for me this crosses like the like bumps it up in terms of quality. And like the idea that there are self-centered energy vampires out there and there are enough of them out there that it's like kind of like a wave that you have to dodge, was a really interesting like micro reflection I made in the feed the other day, when I
Mhm.
found this one. And I don't know, have you ever come across energy vampires?
Uh, so the first person I thought of was Colin Robinson from What to Do in the Shadows, who's a
I thought you were
little
about to just go. I thought you were about to trash talk our buddy Colin, who's
oh!
oh
It's like Rich Colin too.
yeah.
No, no, Colin Robinson's classic, kind of like a middle manager corporates kind of scenario that just like slowly drains your life away. Um, I've been really lucky. I feel like I cannot name particular people who have done that to me, but I've
Mhm.
seen it like happen to my friends.
It sucks, and that's from What We Do in the Shadows, right? I don't know if we dropped
Mhm.
the name. The
Yeah, it's a really funny show by oh my gosh, what's his name?
Taika Waititi.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh, Hilarious. I'm a huge fan of that show. The energy vampires that I've come across are actually like less the boring Office Space esque type figures, and more like people that like induce dread, if that
Mhm.
makes sense. Like I've like so I used to work. Some of our listeners might know. Like I was an aide to a colonel, and that colonel was not the coolest guy. And so like I sat outside of his office from like 6 a.m. to 6, 7, 8, 9 p.m. every day doing whatever he wanted. And every time he walked in, like me and everybody else was just like on edge because some dumb freaking thing was going to happen. He'd be pissed about something. And so like for me, that's kind of like what I think of when energy vampires are, because like the baseline level of what I'm trying to do with my life, like everything
Mhm.
just costs more because
Mhm.
you have this like hyper awareness going on. That stuff sucks.
Yeah.
Um,
But since we work for ourselves, like who is the wave?
it's also ourselves, Kristen.
Boo.
The self-centered energy vampire is the voice that's telling you like, hey, you should really spend the next 3 hours like researching this hyper niche thing because you're going to be better prepared for the actual work that you're going to do. And so like that's why this is in this this banger reel. because the energy vampire is sometimes in the mirror, which is actually, now that I think about it, you can't see yourself in the mirror if you're a vampire. So I don't know if that metaphor holds up, but like you get the picture. All right, let's roll to this one from Android16.eth, candidate for one of my favorite names and ENSs on Farcaster. Highly recommend taking a caffeine fast, a week off of caffeine every once in a while. It'll re-regulate your adenosine systems. Adenosine is an under-discussed, but it's basically the relaxation neurotransmitter. Caffeine withdrawals are a bitch, but it's worth the reduced anxiety, muscular tension, and improved sleep. I'm not a doctor, and I have no idea but if this is true. But I thought it was interesting because I've done caffeine withdrawal or like caffeine fast before. Have you?
Oh, yeah, I have to, because I screw myself to the point of no return, and I'm like, "No." So, actually, I just got my Nespresso half-calf pods, and today
Oh,
has been really hard because it's my first day.
because you're weaning off.
I'm trying
So
to, like, step it down a little bit.
yeah.
So, actually, like, right now, I'm having a decaf, which still has some caffeine in it, so that on Thursday, I can have a little bit during, like, just before our show. But I was
Do you-
wondering if the banger is actually what B16Z said, which is I go all the way to 9 p.m. with my coffee intake, and I'll end up on Shutter Island.
That's pretty funny. I didn't actually see that. I mostly wanted to use this one as like a vessel to talk about caffeine and obsession and
Oh.
how it, for me, they're kind of like two sides of not the same, but like similar coins. So what is your signal that you need to take a caffeine fast?
When I start to blink at the ceiling, because I'm really lucky. I normally
What
don't
does that
have
mean?
sleep issues.
Yeah.
But then if I start to like, take too much caffeine like over a long period of time, then falling asleep becomes much harder. So
Mm.
that's my indicator. Um,
So
I
so
think I'm
sleep
probably
disruption.
more anxious.
Sorry, say that again. I interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, sleep is the major indicator, and I'm probably like just a little bit more on the edge, you know?
That's very reasonable of you. And very responsible, frankly. Oh, Prof, thanks for dropping by, and Nerd as well. My indicator that I need to take some sort of caffeine, detox, is I have a sense of impending doom, and like
Oh,
it's not so like clear because
yeah.
sometimes I'll operate for like days at a time with like this heightened sense of just like, dude, stuff's about to go bad.
Mhm.
And then like every once in a while I'll just be like something will snap me out of it and be like, why do you feel so terrible right now? And then I'll
Mhm.
like look over at the trash can and there's like, a monster, a Celsius, and two Bang energy drinks in it, and I'm like, oh, like it's probably because I'm like chasing an ambulance with heart palpitations.
Oh, I see, I see. I remember, Nanish Prof posted, the purple haze bang or something like that
What?
recently on the feed. Oh.
uh, Dude, but that stuff's crazy. Oh, it looks like Dylan dropped in the chat. Thanks for dropping by. We'll roll to the next one. I'm sure we got plenty more caffeine stuff to talk about later. So this one is the odd one out of the bunch, and I want to see if you can figure
Yeah,
out
I
like
thought this
why.
was such a chill vibe one.
Yeah, so this is Sam here who's talking about simple dinner because I'm sick. Microwave barbecue bun and soy sauce, Laogan ma chili oil, sesame oil. So very very simple 3-part. What was it, dinner? Yeah, and like honestly, super appetizing looking. This one is interesting to me because of the context. And so
Mhm.
if you just see this and you haven't seen any of Sam's other stuff, like you don't know that like they cook pretty regularly, they post about cooking pretty regularly, and it's usually like pretty impressive stuff. Um, and I'm not gonna say that they're obsessed with cooking. I don't know if it like rises to that level of it,
Mhm.
but the willingness to post the thing that is like closer to the ups and downs of real life
Mhm.
like really is meaningful to me, and I think a lot of other people on the internet once they have like the context for that kind of post, if that makes any sense.
Oh, totally. But I actually spoke with someone who's like but I'm not gonna reveal who it is, but pretty OG on Farcaster.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
they were like, I really love to cook, and I was like, oh yeah, why don't you post more like food stuff? But then they were like, oh, I don't want to be made fun of, like what happened to Dan with the mole situation.
Oh, that's fair. Um, I mean, for anyone that is afraid of that, like
Which
Dan
we
is
have to
the
explain. Some folks actually knew enough that they don't know about the mole situation.
yeah.
Um,
I would say most people at this point probably don't.
yeah. So like a while back, our own like DWR Dan had. I don't think he actually even cooked the mole. I think he just like took a photo of it, and like
Hmm.
the way he photographed it was
It
not
was
super
bad.
appetizing.
It looked gross.
Yeah, I'm sure the food was really tasty, so I feel bad for the cook, but then the lighting and everything just made it look really unappetizing. So we made fun of that, because there wasn't much to make fun of back then for like, months on end or something like that. It's like NFTs about it, like, there's like, lots of like culture based on this mole.
Well,
And
the
but yeah,
the
like it means that some people are scared to present themselves.
I mean, to be fair, the thing that turned it from like, okay, that's okay, that's just a bad photo to Farcaster lore was
Hmm.
the fact that like one of the first comments was from a person who I don't think it like is on Farcaster anymore. I don't think they post that much. And it was just never cook again. Thanks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Which is so such a brutal response to what was I think like an earnest like, hey, this food looks pretty good.
Hmm.
But like I don't think like I get why you'd be afraid of posting on the internet because it's frankly a fear of being perceived,
Hmm.
which like honestly I've been feeling a lot this week, which we'll get into later.
Hmm.
Um, but it doesn't have to be a 5-course meal in order to be like a quality post. There's a lot of things that go into interesting stuff on the internet. Obviously,
Right,
like this.
and I think that why this really stands out too is because like there's so much like AI slop that looks
Yeah,
really good that like in fact something authentic like that it just stands out because it's not like perfect like a lot of these AI stuff is.
yeah, and if you kind of like listen to some of the signals on the parts of the internet that like care about what people are doing on the internet, like authentic stuff is kind of a response to, we'll say, like the decade plus of like pretty inauthentic Instagramification of everything. Like that's not a super gigabrain take. Like that's like what a lot of people are thinking. But it's worth saying again that like people want to feel like they're interacting with stuff that's like real and human because so much of their life now isn't.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to remember that. I mean, it's obviously something that we talk about a ton. Okay, so this one is
Ooh,
also kind of interesting.
yeah.
It's Raihan, I think how you pronounce it. It's wild that Kendrick and team just straight up bypassed Spotify, Apple Music, etc., in favor of just IG. The context here is that like Kendrick posted another song on Instagram and kind of like the ongoing beef with him and Drake. Maybe it's a beef between Kendrick and the rest of the hip hop like industry now based on that song. But like, what do you think about this one, Kristen?
I didn't know that they're using this interesting IG only strategy. Like my rudimentary understanding of this like ecosystem is that like Spotify and Apple Music take a huge cut, just like other platforms.
Hmm.
So like for an artist to like take their music back and to say like, hey, I don't need you as a distribution platform is such a power move.
Well, it's interesting to me because like I've taken it from the perspective of like they don't need to do the work of getting them on the other platforms because as soon as they post it, it gets like copied and reposted everywhere by the
Mm-hmm.
internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've seen these other creators, some like podcasters, video creators, whatever. They just like do their stuff in a format that is like easily copyable. Like they
Mm-hmm.
remove any protections. They don't like strike copyright stuff, and they're basically using platform ad revenue to incentivize an army of reposters because they already have this momentum of being like somebody that like people want to watch. And so like if it goes somewhere else, it will get watched and they will get paid for that. Which is just like I don't know. It's like the obsession piece is with the people that are watching these big players, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also in the fact that the big players are like, hey, I don't need to be so obsessed with all of these things that I probably did on my come up. And so there's like this ebb and flow, or maybe obsession is never created or destroyed. It's just moved around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for Ryan to observe this, like that's a banger because I wouldn't have noticed the subtlety.
Yeah, and it's also like it adds a little bit to the mystique, because as soon as somebody posts something on one platform, they like go to the other ones to see like, oh, was this real? Did this actually happen? And so it's kind of like a funneling of attention as well, which is interesting. All right, we're gonna get into this last one here. All right, we got from Six, who always has some very thoughtful takes. Companies are crazy. You have to build the product so that it works at solving a problem, sell the product such that the market pays you more than it costs to build it, build the organization that does 1 and 2, sell the organization to people who want to join it. It's a miracle that anything works at all. How painful is this to read?
Well, it reminded me of your piece about how the world's held together by duct tape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, as you know, as someone who's struggling with these steps right now,
it's hard.
It made me feel better, as I was like, okay, I am doing a very hard thing, because sometimes I forget that, you know.
Yeah. Like there's this is I think, oh yeah, it's the first comment. Okay, it all makes sense now. The world is a museum of passion projects. That's from John Collison, one of the founders of Stripe.
Oh.
That line, like the world is a museum of passion projects, has like maybe shaped my worldview more than like almost any other, tech dude quote. Because for me, I think it like really gives you permission to actually lean into the thing that you like feel the urge to. Because the only reason that like I have this microphone in front of me is because thousands, probably tens of thousands of people came together to invent recording technology, figure out the material science to get like the plastics and the metals working together. The supply chain got together, like all of these pieces had to come together. Somebody had to design the freaking thing so that I can just yap into your ear on, the 10 millionth podcast that lives on the internet. And that's fascinating because it's basically a monument to obsession. And that's like really, really cool and like really, really scary in the same breath, because like Six was pointing out, the barrier to something like existing and persisting for any amount of time in human history is like really, really hard. It's like really, really high to get over that barrier.
Yeah, those are really great points. I see that, like, for example, a nerd is saying that restaurant margins are razor thin. That's why they generally don't make it, essentially. So I think there's also like a societal situation going on, right? Where like for example, restaurants are just not well supported in the United States. It becomes like a very razor margin situation. But in Japan, my understanding is that like there are still great restaurants because they are mom and pops. They literally live upstairs. They own the property. So they are able to get by with these like really thin margins. But because that society kind of like allows this to exist. So I think it's like, on the one hand, we're going to talk about obsession, but I also want to like put the feelers out to the point that like society has to be able to allow us to incubate our obsessions. You know what I mean? Because I think everyone has their own unique gift and everyone has their own like really interesting passion and obsessions, but very few of us can actually like live off of them. And then like that is the bigger issue.
That's one of my favorite things to actually like yap about. I think what we see with the creator economy today is like a proto amoeba, like petri dish version of the future, where that is something that more people have the like time and space and freedom to do. We have a lot of problems to solve in terms of like connecting like dollars to the value that people create with the videos and music and art, etc. that they create. But the fact that somebody who sails all the time, like lives at a marina because they just like dedicated their life to being a boat person, the fact that they can start a YouTube channel about like niche sailing knots and like find the 10,000, 20,000 other people across the world that like really care about that thing. Like that's incredible. And we've never been able to do that in like the history of humanity. And so I'm kind of obsessed with like trying to facilitate that world, because that's really, really like that's a vision of the future that I'm really excited about, because I would love it if everybody could just spend an extra 10 hours a week like leaning into the thing that they like to think about. But that's I mean, I guess that's why we're kind of doing this thing.
Exactly. And before you close your windows, want to feature our viewer of
Yeah.
the episode. We still haven't decided what it was called, but we asked our viewers to mint our episodes, and then one random lucky viewer will get to be featured. And today it is abeg007.dgen.eth. Thank you so much for minting our episodes. We really appreciate all of your support.
Yeah,
so we can
thank you. Thank you so much, and everybody else. We're going to continue to do this as we love highlighting people that are coming to the chat. Like, it's incredible that anybody shows up to this. Honestly, it's like it warms my heart, and so appreciate y'all. And then Dahlia, I think is how you pronounce it, had a really good point. It's harder to devote energy to a passion when it's just taken up by surviving, and that's real. And that's frankly one of the bigger barriers to why people don't get to spend more time doing this things that they like.
And also capitalizing a passion can kill it. I totally understand that. And I think like that's it, right? Like a lot of what you're building with Seymour, which was one of the reasons why I chatted with you in the first place, was you were trying to help me figure out how do I make money as a creator so I can capitalize on my passion without feeling like I'm completely drained.
Yeah, it's super hard as like an individual, and like it's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know if it's unfortunate, but it's like a reality of creator economy stuff that like there's an amount of passion that you need to like fundamentally have so that you can get through every single day, when like most of your early days, nobody is paying attention to you, like at all. And screaming into the void is maybe one of the worst things that like a human can experience.
Oh, for sure. And so I think let's get into our obsessions and the craft of making it viable for us.
So I wanted to ask you, because I've been like trying to figure out my answer to this. Like, when does a passion turn into an obsession? Like, what is like the line of demarcation? Because passion is like generally taken to be like a good thing, whereas an obsession is like generally taken to be like a bad thing. I think we're going to push back on that idea. But like, when does that like cross into being an obsession?
So it's really interesting because I think the word passion originally actually had a negative connotation, right? Like passion, action sort of thing. And now we take it as like a good thing, as I think historically it was not a positive word. But then I think for me, obsession is when I'm seeing the trees instead of the forest, sort of like you think you are obsessed and you're trying to meet this goal, but then in actuality, you are floating slowly away and away from your goal without realizing it.
Gotcha. Okay, so kind of getting tunnel vision on the thing is like your definition there. I see that. So like one of the things, one of the really, really tough things about military stuff, like I'm an ex-Army officer, if anybody didn't know, is like when you're navigating through the woods, you tend to drift because you can't walk in a straight line through the woods because there's like trees and rocks and hills and all that stuff.
What's your handedness too, right? Like right-handed people tend to go towards the right kind of thing.
Yeah, a little bit in terms of like your gait. But the thing that like trips up people more is not paying attention to like elevations and hillsides that they're on, because you tend to drift downhill because it's easier to walk downhill. And so like if you're like walking along a hill and like you're like, let's say downhill's to your left, like a lot of the times you end up like down in the valley. And that isn't necessarily where you want to go. And so like,
and I think the analogy here is like, I think we were just talking about this before the show starts, when it's oftentimes when we're faced with a big chunky problem, right? Like for me, it's like figuring out my content flow and finding clients and blah, blah. And like so therefore obsessions about these micro tasks start to emerge because they give me the feeling of action and speed and all of that. But it's because, you know, the big chunky thing is not broken down into smaller steps yet.
So maybe I'll like supplement that, or I think it's more of a compliment than a supplement.
Hmm.
I listened to a really interesting talk, I think from NPR, maybe like a decade plus ago now. But it was about the psychology of extremism,
Hmm.
and kind of like the unifying issue with extremism is you end up like mapping or compressing all of your life into like one version of you. And
Hmm.
so like if you think of yourself as like a multi-dimensional person, like, you know, like I'm a guy, I'm an American, I was an infantry officer, now I do startup stuff, I'm a developer, like you have all these, I'm a writer. When you have all of these different identities that you associate yourself with, you kind of like fundamentally live in a state of nuance. And
Hmm.
like when you live in a state of nuance, you are open to like a lot of different things because you know that the world is more complicated than like one worldview.
Right.
A lot of extremism kind of like revolves around getting people to collapse everything into one overarching identity and really like one overarching message.
Hmm.
Uh, in that flattening of your personality and the nuance and kind of like the everything interesting about you into this one message, for me, is like a really useful definition of obsession. It's just like when everything else stops like having a meaningful impact on your life, like that's when I kind of like catch myself being obsessed. So it's like the absence of everything else is obsession.
Hmm. And people do that because they feel unsafe, right? It's like at least for me, I feel like when I'm obsessed too, is because I'm like, oh, there's some background feeling of doom or like lack of safety or something. And if you're able to like cling on to an obsession, that keeps you feeling safe temporarily.
So kind of like couching it in defense mechanism kind of
Mhm.
language is like how you experience a lot of like pieces of, we'll call it obsession, for because that's what we're talking about. Is there any version of obsession that you've like felt that you didn't think was like fear based or like anxiety based?
Um, so I think that's where, like, again, my fantasy of Japanese people that may not be accurate is like there's also like healthy obsession of like, you know, shokunin, like, you know, craftsmanship and like the
Mm.
beauty of like perfecting a certain thing. Like to me, that seems like really healthy obsession, and it's like a lifetime's work.
So I think people like it's like I think calling it an obsession is a very like a fair way to do it. But I
Hmm.
think like my mind more easily jumps to the idea of having like a purpose or a mission. And
Hmm.
so I guess like we also need to kind of define the barrier between like a mission and an obsession, or like a purpose and an obsession. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
I I hope that we can all map our obsessions back into our values or mission or some sort of like higher goal.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like that's a little lofty because when we're obsessed, I don't think I'm thinking about those things. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, it's a very nice ideal.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I mean, it honestly kind of goes back to this idea of like the grind too,
Mhm,
because
mhm,
like something being a grind fundamentally kind of like means it's not super fun. And how do you
mhm,
do things that aren't fun? Well, you kind of like suck it up and grit through it. And obsession really helps with that because you're kind of like turning off parts of your brain that would like acknowledge the misery.
mhm.
Speaking of misery, looks like we got DeWolfie in the chat. Thanks for dropping by.
No, thank you so much for going past your bedtime.
Yeah, for actually,
um,
I'm up past my bedtime too.
yeah.
Um,
So I
but
think obsession can be harnessed if you're deliberate about it. Because you know, when we talk about doom scrolling and other like obsessive things, we
yeah,
often report it after the fact, right? I'm like, Cameron, I was on Instagram Reels for 60 minutes just now, and it's like a very much like you wake up from that dissociative state, and then
yeah,
you're like, wait, that wasn't what I want. But whereas I sometimes have like healthy obsessions of like I'm using, as you know, I'm trying to take out transcripts and turn it into a book, and like things that I think are obsessive, but then like feels healthier and like, okay, this has some sort of outcome that I'm actually aiming for.
Mm. I guess that's kind of the thing, right? Like when you know where you're trying to go, turning on, I guess like life autopilot can be really, really helpful. I used to have like a mantra that my dad actually taught me, which
Mm-hmm.
like I which when you play it out, it doesn't work. Like it
Mm-hmm.
only works if something really is finite.
Mm-hmm.
But he's just like, because so my dad went to the same military college that I did. He didn't end up in
Oh.
like the army, but he went, and that's how it got on my radar. And he's just like, because the first year is basically a year of like hazing, like it's your freshman year, it sucks. And he's just like, Cameron, you could do anything for 6 months, and just like shrugged when he said it. And it was just like there was no further like, hey, this is why you can do anything for 6 months. He's just like, no, like you can do anything for 6 months. And like that's roughly the length of the shitty part of the freshman year. And sure enough, when I was just like having a really bad day, I just like would realize like, okay, I can do anything for 6 months. It's just 6 months. And like that attitude is helpful. And it's kind of like a way to keep yourself in the, or like, it's kind of like pulling the cord on the lawnmower of your obsession, or at least that's how I kind of thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but obviously, if you keep telling yourself you can do anything for a week, you can do anything for a month, you can do anything for a year, eventually, like you got to actually spend time doing the stuff that doesn't make you miserable. Um, but for a piece of it, it's been useful. That said,
I can't do it.
you can't
I
self talk.
cannot do it.
You can't
No.
delulu your way into sucking it up.
This might be my flaw. It's like I've seen my friends tell me like, you can do anything for 6 months, and then my gut
Mm.
reaction is, no, I cannot. That is my problem. That's why I have to design my life to be always around doing things that I can and want to do.
I mean, it kind of comes back to something that we've talked about
Because
before.
I'm
Like,
maybe because I'm like, I've already done the whole like long grind
yeah,
PhD sort of thing. I don't have any more of those units left.
well, okay. So as your friend and outsider looking into your life,
Hmm.
I do think you can do anything for 6 months. Like you specifically, not like the royal you, everybody, but like you specifically, I think that you can.
Hmm.
It sounds like though you are telling yourself, no, I can't do anything for 6 months. When in fact, what you're really saying is, I don't want to do this for 6 months. Is that
They're
fair?
not the same.
No, those are not the same. Like, like for me, the you can do anything for 6 months is like
Mhm,
it's like an assertion
mhm,
against the like the angry specters of the universe that
mhm.
no, screw you, I'm going to do this thing that I'm choosing to do.
Right. And I want to bring up Dahlia's comment here.
Yeah.
There's a danger though when value is tied to productivity. The things that have value are the things that pay. Obsessions that don't have value because they don't. Here's the thing, Dahlia. My trapping right now is that the thing that I want to do does not have immediate value. Like,
Yeah.
right? Like this show and all that, we're very thankful for your support, but it's not a living amount in the San Francisco Bay Area. And like,
Yeah.
however, there's no way for most creators to be able to start out like having a living wage. It's like almost like you
Yeah.
have to jump in with this like sacrifice in the beginning.
Yeah. And that's also
And that's
why
my question.
like that's also why we kind of have this like royal class of creators
Mhm,
where through virtue of like explicit nepo babydom, or like the by virtue of their life, they were a venture capitalist and now they have a butt ton of money, and so they have the like time, space, and capital to like just yap
mhm,
on the internet. Like
mhm.
that's why it feels like a lot of these creators are just straight up like able to do a thing that you can't, because they literally can't, right? Like they have
Right,
the
and then that
capacity
is
to do it.
my obsession is, like, clarifying this misleading situation I see with a lot of my creator friends,
Mm,
where, like, I see a lot of 'em are taking risks without realizing what they're doing, or, like, following some internet gurus who are like, "Oh, you just have to do this," without you know what I mean? It's as you know, it's a really common thing that you see in the creator economy.
yeah, the equations that people are sold are missing some really important variables, which is a
Right.
shame.
and it's the math, and then like I get to be the Debbie Downer. It sucks. Like so among my creator friends, I'm actually the Debbie Downer who's going like your math doesn't math because they don't realize that, for example, if you're trying to do a business that has one-on-one coaching, like
Yep.
and you want to have enough people in the pipeline, you need to have a way bigger audience than you do right now. It just like you just don't have that initial lift. And I think like that's where yeah, my obsession about the creator economy is like clarifying like these math proportions of
Yeah.
like and for people to be able to like slowly baby step their way up, you know? And I
Yeah.
like to, and you know, just to be transparent, like I'm able to do this because I saved up for my corporate career, or else this is not sustainable at all.
Same, and I'll take it even further, Krista. And like, I think it's this is a fair peek behind the curtain. Like, the
Mhm,
only reason we have like the level of success that we do now with people showing up to the chat is
mhm,
because we've been on Warpcast for like year plus, just like meeting people, and like half the people in the chat are just like explicitly our friends, and
mhm,
that's awesome, and we really appreciate y'all. But like, if we were doing the same thing without having been on Warpcast, it would be a much more painful like first few episodes that we're doing.
mhm.
All right, I want to bring this up from Royal Aid, who dropped this in the chat. One, as a good indicator that like if you drop good stuff in the chat, we're going to talk about it because like we appreciate y'all, and the magic of this format is interacting with the chat. Like we have no illusions about that.
Mhm.
But Royal Aid says, I feel like doom scrolling is more compulsion versus obsession. What do you think about that?
Mm. I like that phrasing because I think compulsion means that you can't help yourself and like you're a little bit dissociated from the process.
Yeah.
And definitely that's how I feel when I'm doom scrolling. And I'm again I'm trying to like I don't know whether it's true for all of you, but then it's almost like you watch one of these like clips or shorts and you're like, oh, this it was funny, ha ha ha. And then you just keep trying to find that next one that will give you that same feeling again.
Trying to get the hit.
Yeah, just trying to get the hit, right?
Yeah. The
Mhm.
like for me, so kind of like the things that we're feeding into, you know, what I'm calling kind of like some obsessive tendencies this week, compulsive tendencies, is like
Mhm.
I had a feeling that something wasn't going well.
Mhm.
And like there isn't an explicit, you know, this is a bad thing that happened to me. Although I
Mhm.
had some like, oh well, I had some life stuff that I'm just actually now processing a little bit live on this show. I had some life stuff that I was just like, no, I'm good, and I don't think that I was fully good. I also had some startup stuff where like we had thought we were having kind of like a good momentum week last week, and then we got into this week and realized a lot of the work that we had done wasn't like was kind of okay. We got to start over.
Mm.
I started looking at some metrics for some clips for us, especially on places like TikTok, frankly, where it's like a little more toxic than other parts of the internet that we spend most of our time. And like, it's like the confluence of all of these things for me uh, kind of led me to make, I'll say, suboptimal choices with how I was spending my time. A good bit of doom scrolling, a good bit of like actively researching things that like plausibly would help me get better at the things I'm trying to do, but like
Mhm.
mostly avoiding the like actual work that is going to make the things that I'm like trying to do happen. And then I also, through that like fixation, stopped doing some really useful behaviors in my life that I know from my lived experience like make my life better. One
Oh,
of
what are
those
those?
being, well, I mean, like going on walks. Like that's like
Okay.
the big banner one, and it's actually one of my signals to myself that I, like something was up this week. Uh, if I notice that I've been inside for like 6 hours without some sort of like walk or break or whatever,
Mhm.
that means something has like broken me from my positive loop habits.
Are you back on track?
No, I'm like, honestly, I like kind of trauma dump on the chat here and hope it helps me with tomorrow. But the
So do
like,
you normally like for me, like one way to like cure obsession is the next day reset. I don't know, like this is again the good and the bad part of Kristen's brain is that like by tomorrow I'll completely forget what I was obsessed
mm,
about and I get to start over in a Groundhog Day kind of way.
do you find that the next day you actually lock into the mode that you're trying to lock into?
I don't want to say yes. It's more like you get to throw the dice again.
Yeah, like I do think of kind of like life as a roulette wheel that you can kind of manipulate with how you choose to
Mhm.
do things. I'm very, very good at being like, okay, like tomorrow I'm gonna get it locked in. And so here's like my toxic trait that I do is like,
Mhm.
okay, I realized I waste a bunch of time doing something, or like I don't spend it optimally or whatever my brain thinks is optimally. And then I will go in and I will clear a bunch of emails, and then I will make my to-do list, and then I will, clear my notifications. And like those are three like mini dopamine bursts that I can get to be like, "Oh, I accomplished something." And then I don't necessarily pick up where the good work of that has left off. And like the way that the data scientists have built our life economy and like machines around us is
Mhm.
by the time I go to start the next day, I have enough notifications and emails and all that stuff that like I can also distract myself with that without doing any meaningful work. That's not every day. That's I wouldn't even say that's like most days, but those are the days that I like viscerally feel the outcomes of, or like viscerally feel like reaping what I sow.
Mm.
But
Your naming one of my obsessions is like having inbox zero.
I mean, like me too, obviously. Like that's
Ah.
if we were to pull out some like hallmarks of insecure overachievers,
Mhm.
inbox zero is like way up there.
Yeah, yeah. So you know the inventor of inbox zero, Merlin Mann. I once stalked him because I know he had this like I want to say Tumblr or one of those other
So
blogging things,
I'm
and
still
I
stuck on
noticed.
Merlin Mann as the name. That's a wild name.
Oh yeah, he's one of the OG blogger, internet famous people.
I
Um,
have not gone down
no,
that rabbit hole.
43 folders, personal hipster PDA. None of this rings a bell. Oh,
Enlighten me.
I feel old. Yeah, so one of the OG bloggers on the internet.
Yeah.
And then I noticed that he was at a coffee shop that was not too far from my house. So I conveniently appeared and said hi.
So you went to his house?
No, it was a coffee shop. It was a coffee shop
Oh,
that
oh,
I
coffee shop.
know he's been hanging out there to work. And then, what
Okay.
if I just like, appear there sometimes?
Real casual. Casual
Very, very
stalking.
casual. Yes. And he was very nice and he talked to me. But yeah, like I think one thing I wanted to ask you about is obsession a form of admiration or emulation? Because I feel like, you and I both love creators, comedians, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we both decided that we're going to become that.
Yeah. So I think it can be an expression of kind of like admiration and like love and admiration and those kind of things are definitely different facets of the same emotion. But like, I kind of view it in a couple different ways. Like, one of them is definitely that, right? Like, I want to be like the people that like, I want to do the thing that they did. So, like, let me copy some of those behaviors.
Mhm.
But I think like I often just think about it as like table stakes in order to do anything hard. And like that's obviously not like the healthiest way to think about living a life.
Mhm.
But I do think that there's, like Six and Patrick Collison like said it like everything like bringing something out of nothing is a really really hard fight.
Mhm.
And like the way that you fight that fight is by like showing up, especially on the days that you don't want to. And so like there's that piece of it. But I also really do think, and I don't think this is cope. Like I think that there's a real part of me that just does this. And like I'm not gonna sit here and like self-diagnose with anything. But like
Just does
I
what?
like like leans into stuff.
Mm.
And like not in like a miserable way, not like in a hyperfixation way, but like I do get a lot of enjoyment out of like mastering a thing at like any level.
Mhm.
And so, oh man, there's so many fun things to bring up here. I'll bring this one up first. So, like, as an example, when I deployed to Kuwait and Afghanistan back in 2016, 17, I wanted to give myself a reward for coming back. And so I had built some computers when I was a kid, but I hadn't really done it since then. And I was just like, I'm gonna build a computer when I get back.
Mhm.
And if anybody listening who's never built a computer, it sounds a lot more impressive than it is. It's basically Legos, but it's cool Legos that let you play video games. And so I was like, all right, I'm gonna build a computer and I'm gonna get a game because I wanted to like decompress. And I was gonna take like a month vacation after deployment.
Was it
I
Command and Conquer?
No, no, no.
Figure out what game.
It was The Witcher 3 because it was like the golden era of that. But here's the thing. This is how it relates back to obsession. Before my deployment, because I knew I wasn't gonna have stable internet access, I knew I like wasn't gonna be able to be on the internet. I found every bit of media, lore, short story, novel, some in the original Polish that I needed to translate about the Witcher universe that I could find. And I put it all together, and like the bulk of my like time passing on my deployment was with Witcher 3 stuff. And so I read all of the lore from start to finish so that when I got back, built a computer and I played The Witcher 3, which I 100%ed afterwards, it was like I could appreciate the experience of 100%ing that game, which is a phenomenal game, that much more. Because like every bit of lore had like extra nuggets of like, oh, this is from this story, or that's like from this book. And that's to say, like, I willingly and excitedly obsessed about The Witcher for like a year. And it was just a really, it's a thing that I still look back on. I'm like, I'm glad I did that. I have zero regrets about doing that. And like, I don't know, like, I think that there's some like pieces of that doesn't quite fit the admiration or table stakes or whatever aspects of obsession that we're talking about. Okay, well, while you respond, I'm going to pull up Kane from Command and Conquer because I got to figure out if that's like an insult or not.
I don't think it's an insult.
I don't think so either, but I want to know. Oh,
Yeah.
no. I mean, he's the villain.
Yeah, like, there's a lot of character, a lot of persona associated with being a villain.
Yeah. All right.
I'm
gonna have to go down a route.
The equivalent of, for me, and probably like World of Warcraft. That was probably the most immersive game I was in part of. And I also played the original Warcraft 3, and a little bit of Hearthstone, but that didn't go well.
What happened with Hearthstone? Also, are you ready for this?
Yes. That's it.
It's a vibe. Thank you, Ivy. I appreciate you.
Or now we're all set for Halloween.
I'm not shaving my head again.
Yeah, Alex, unfortunately we don't have a Jamie at this budget. Eventually, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll see how far we can get this to go so that we can have this off-camera character.
So when you were a kid, were you ever obsessed with anything and then like were told not to be, and then now you're like, if only I had kept up with it, then I'll be, super happy, such successful, or whatever?
Probably, but I think like, I don't know, like the like my household was very, I kind of played sports growing up because my dad was like that was his thing. He really enjoyed that. He still plays tennis today. And like, I was always like the younger end of my age bracket in Georgia because they like do them by age. And so I was always small and I always sucked. And so like, I never really locked into the sports stuff. And so like, I would lock in on other stuff, which I think manifested most as like being a weird internet kid. And so like, I mean, I guess you could say that I kind of locked in on memes and internet culture and all the like good and bad that came with it. Because obviously, like as a kid, you find toxic parts of the internet, or at least you could. There was like less and more guardrails in some ways than there are today. And so like, but nobody ever told me to stop. Reading. I also read mountains of like sci-fi fantasy books. And so like I was never told to stop. But none of the things that I locked into were particularly useful, I would say.
What are you talking about? Like everything you just said is completely useful now. What the heck?
I mean, who would have thought that like meme awareness was useful? I guess that is true.
It is gonna come November change society if it succeeds. Okay, like
No.
memes are more important than ever. But the
All right.
reason why I bring it up is like I never really explain why I'm obsessed with like trying to make a SaaS, even though you're always like,
Yeah.
stop it.
Software as a service for anyone
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah, it's because like when I was a kid, I was like doing a lot of web dev stuff for fun
Okay.
and like, making blogs and everything. And one thing that I really regret was I did not keep up with this obsession. And it's because
Mm,
like, my friends thought it was super weird. And then like, I wasn't really encouraged to do computer stuff and in a very
yeah.
typical woman fashion, right? So I do wonder if there is like a version of Kristen who, would be so much more skilled if she had kept it up. And then of course now I'm trying to rapidly catch up with like AI and tools and all of that.
Yeah.
Um
All right.
so
So
I feel like there's this like thing where like I feel like we all have obsessions, but then the people who really succeed with them, like either financially or even just like, happiness wise, like they kept it up and there was no breaks in between.
so I think I fundamentally disagree with that. Like,
Oh, what?
yeah, like both on like principle, but
Mhm,
also in like practical terms. And so I do agree that
mhm,
people that are at the absolute top of a narrow field
mhm,
have a continuous track record of doing that thing for the most part. Like, you can't be an Olympic gymnast really without like starting from like a super, super young age.
mhm,
Um, but more often than not, when you look at the things that people are like the absolute top at, it is like a definable thing. And it's like a thing with rules.
mhm,
But most of life isn't a thing with rules. And so like I think it's a legibility problem with how we think about like success
mm.
more than like a fundamental law of like that's how you succeed at things. And like if anyone in the chat hasn't read Venkatesh Rao's article or like little essay on legibility, I would recommend you read that. It's very good. What?
You should read that, but also recognize that that version of VGR is dead. Okay, like
Yeah.
I don't know who this new person is who's taken over his body and posts really really bizarre stuff on Farcaster, but
Dude's just living his life. Like
I
we
know, but
don't
he
have to be
keeps
static.
sharing all of his classics. It's really weird.
Yeah, but like, that's like any person that has like Lindy literature that shows up today, like
Mhm,
they were that person for a piece of their life,
mhm.
right? But anyway, so the
No,
point
and
of the
I wanna trap him in that box.
yeah, but like the legibility thing is really important. The short version is like the German government tried to plant a bunch of forests in like really straight, easy to
Mhm,
like navigate rows, and absolutely
mhm,
like killed the forest ecosystem. Like it turns out forests and a lot of other things need to be inherently chaotic and messy in order to have like their version of like optimal
mhm,
healthy thing. And like I bring that up because it's a really good example of how people, like just us in general, default to thinking things that we understand are true or we can understand and perceive are true.
mhm,
So we like we poo-poo things that are just like, oh, that's messy, that's chaotic, that's like that's not like nice and neat and in a box. And we like put it lower on our like value and importance hierarchy a lot of times in scenarios where it's not true, but we still do it because it feels better to like put that in that box. You see it with like college campuses and like, do people walk on the sidewalk or do they walk in the paths that are like natural for people to walk on, ant trails? Okay. And so legibility, that with career stuff, it's so easy to point to someone and be like, that person's a snowboarder. Like that's a thing that you can look at and you're like, okay, I understand what they do. I understand how they got there.
mhm,
Most things in the world that you can become in your life aren't as clear cut as a snowboarder. Even like a freaking programmer, they're not just a programmer. Like, are they front end or back end? Are they doing some sort of like specific language? Do they like only do this piece of this there's just
mhm,
so many parts of it that like will never be legible. And so since they're not legible, we don't write about it. We don't talk about it because it's hard. Anyway, I'm going to shut up there because I've been yapping for a second. What are your thoughts about that?
So I hear what you're saying. And of course,
Yes.
I feel like in the ideal world, yes, I want all of us to be very comfortable, to be illegible. I think the disconnect is that if you want to be able to like survive in
Yep.
economy, your ability to turn the illegible stuff into something temporarily legible that
Yep.
can be used to address someone's problems that they would then pay for, like
Mm.
that whole pathway is what's really tricky.
Well, so okay, so that's the second half. Thank you for teeing me up for that. Most really valuable things today, I think, are boundary jobs. And like what a boundary job is a thing that is like in between like two or three or four or five different things.
Mhm.
Like you're not the programmer, you're not the person coming up with the requirements for the product. You're the person in the middle who's trying to get those two people to talk to each other. If you look at basically what we're building with the AI monsters that we're creating, is
Mhm.
we're creating a world where the only thing that matters are people at the boundary that can translate and feed machine inputs and outputs and get the stuff to where it needs to go. That means the narrative is the most important part, or one of the most important parts.
Mhm.
And so like that's where I actually think your sojourn, which is kind of how you're thinking about it now that you're in this one spot that does have kind of like some predefined stuff, like your sojourn into this other thing, these other places in the world is the valuable part, because
Mhm.
everybody in your field has that baseline level of competence at the thing. Like, yeah, you're playing catch up at the beginning of it, but like once you get to that baseline where everybody else is, you now have like this unfair advantage that like it's fully fair. They could have gone and gotten a neuroscience PhD, but they didn't. And so like I genuinely think you're bringing to the roles that you're trying to do a skill set, a perspective, and like an attitude that like people that have been doing that thing their whole life just fundamentally don't have.
Well, that's very kind of you to express.
I'm
And
sure
I'm
it doesn't
obsessed.
feel that way.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm obsessed with like solving this issue for other folks in the same boat, you know?
Mhm.
Like fundamentally, as you know, my daily obsessions all come down to Kristen trying to organize her content funnel to be in different places all at once and then have it all organized. And then also like be able to outreach and talk to people and
Mhm.
like meet them at where their problems are at. Like those are the only things I think about all day these days. Um, you know, and I think like there is something here now where I feel
Yep.
like there's obsession and there is like being a creator and aliveness that's like more fundamentally tied because of the whole like impending AI slop situation.
Hmm.
Like
Okay.
the act of making something original to me feels really alive. And like that
Okay.
to me is the healthy obsession I'm trying to articulate.
Mm. Okay. Saying it back to you, there's an inherent challenge with doing the things that you're actively doing. It's like really the effort that it takes to stay alive that the chat was talking about earlier.
Mhm.
There's also this piece of like there's this impending uh-oh feeling on the horizon because nobody knows what's going to happen next. Like models are getting like giant platforms are releasing like industry changing models every quarter and they're all doing it at that pace. Like that's crazy. And
Mhm.
so like there's this anxiety about the future, pre-worry that we talk about. Arguably like a reasonable pre-worry. But then there's this also piece of like you want to find the parts of it that are going to be like enduringly like real, useful, insert whatever like good connotation adverb that you want to put in there.
Mhm.
I'm gonna look that up later. Um, where does that leave you? Like, where do you like equalize out, or do you?
Is that one of those, like, I'll know it when I see it sort of things?
I don't know. Like, I think honestly, I think like a healthy dose of confidence like just solves
Mhm,
a lot of problems.
mhm,
Because I think you're the kind of person that is going to be worried if they're being overconfident about something, which probably means you can default to just being confident about it because you're not going to end up being too over.
mm,
Um, I also think that action generates information. So like us
mhm,
doing this and having these sessions, like really helps, I think, both of us understand how we're feeling and thinking and opining about things better. Um, but I also think like there is a piece of it that we're both trying to do, which is find the parts of it that we need to like double down on.
Mhm.
And like there's tactical pieces of that, which is like what you're talking about of like, okay, if we figure out how to like make clips faster, we can get more of them out there, we can get them on more platforms, like maybe we'll grow faster.
Mhm.
But I also think that there's like there's like it's like the difference between tactics and strategy. Like we've been talking a lot about tactics, but I think the strategy we have mostly nailed down right. Like, you know, we only have a few, you know, episodes under our belt right now, but like the strategy is two friends honestly talking about like really important topics that everybody on the world in the world like relates to in some meaningful way.
Mhm.
And we do that without pretending like we know the answer. And at least
Right.
I think
Which
I think
I think that's what the world needs more of, because I don't see that,
yeah,
like, really often.
yeah, which is like, of course, like the TikTok short or like the TikTok where someone's just like, this is how you get 100,000 followers in the next 6 days. Like, of course, that one is gonna like hit harder because everybody wants the right answer. But
Mhm.
like living in the uncertainty of the lack of answer is the point because I think that is the default state of the world.
For sure. And then Ivy said very keen, like, world domination. You hit the nail on the head. World domination comes up in our conversations a lot.
Ivy's piercing.
I want to end with, like, one thing I'm obsessed about, Cameron, which is
Yep.
getting our subscriber count up. Did you know that according to YouTube analytics, 56.2% of you are not subscribed to our channel even though you watch our stuff? It would be wonderful. Actually, I sounded like a very typical YouTuber with that
Yeah,
stat, but
yeah,
it is
yeah.
true. So please hit the subscribe button. Again, this is such a
Please.
vanity metric, and I feel like I wish it wasn't this way, but I noticed this
Yeah.
with myself too. I subscribe to YouTube channels that already have some subscribers. So
Yep.
as we're getting into like a bigger number, that helps people who don't know us be interested.
It is what it is, y'all. Help us out. If you want us to keep yapping on here, we gotta get them numbers up because we gotta
Exactly.
justify that this is worth our time.
Yeah, and a thumbs up.
And a
Uh,
thumbs up.
thank
Like, subscribe, share clips, send
you so
us
much.
fun comments.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I speak nerd, Chow,
Ooh, yeah,
Dao,
yeah, yeah.
Ivy, Riley, A Rob, Manish Craft.
Everybody else, thanks for sticking around to the end. It like really means a lot. This is a marathon. But you know what? We sprint marathons. Isn't that right, Kristen?
Exactly.